in the room. I'm the executive director for the Committee for Better New Orleans, and I'm really delighted to be here having this conversation. Quick word of thanks to Sun Saint for hosting us in this gorgeous space. Also to everyone who's committed to helping New Orleans make the most of what is an unprecedented opportunity to build and to rebuild and to make the city better. So thank you all for being here and for doing the work that I know many of you do outside of this room to help to make sure that we are building a better future. We're here today to talk about protect, how we can build resilience in our streets and transportation systems as we face increasing impacts of climate change. Next slide. So just a quick word on sort of why CPNO is doing this in the first place. I took on this role about a year ago, almost 2 now. Almost 2 years ago, and the organization, though, has been around since 1966. At that time, many of the decisions that we are facing, that we're dealing with today, were made. Here's one example of this is an aerial view of the city at the time, like the I-10 expressway was just being constructed in 2000. This is one example of many of the decisions that were made in the name of urban renewal in the 1960s that we're now dealing with today. So since then, CPNO has really, from that point on, CPNO has been working on helping people understand and navigate those decisions and influence them so that we can make better decisions. One of the things that I find, I say all the time, we're not perfect before this. And I have a lot of hope for this work because if we made decisions that ended up with this infrastructure, we can make different decisions and end up with different infrastructure. Beautiful. So we're really invested here in making sure that we can bring in as much as possible of the federal resources available for the city. And here's the kicker, to use it in an equitable way, a way that reduces disparity and meets the needs that New Orleanians and Louisianans are facing today. So really excited to be here having this conversation. It's fun. A little bit more about how we got here into this. We've been helping people understand, navigate, and influence decisions all the way from that day forward. It's really in our DNA to help people understand, navigate, influence. We're excited to be doing that with infrastructure here today. I will go through the agenda before I hang on. Here's some more pictures of some engaging people. So Rob's going to talk about our future campaign. This is the campaign I just referenced to make sure that New Orleans gets as much of this money as possible and ensure that it's spent in an equitable way. Then we'll talk about the collective group's experience of resilience and evacuation in New Orleans. That's what this Protect program is really about. We'll provide more context about the program and then hear from our wonderful presenters, Vorhoff with the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities, Tom Haysley with the Regional Planning Commission, and Aron Chang with Civic Studio and the Water Leaders Institute. Then we'll talk about ways to get involved in this campaign to make sure that New Orleans is prepared and is able to rebuild equitably, perhaps for the first time ever. I'll hand it off to Rob. Thank you all so much for being here.
Really? I am going to sit, and that's my style. So we can advance the slide, please. So I do want to thank everyone for being here. My name is Rob Bell. I'm focused on this campaign, building our t-shirt. I want to thank our 3 t-shirt presenters here. I did just introduce them, but we appreciate them taking the time to be here to help explain the context and realities of the different from different angles of how this money, these opportunities can actually hit the ground and make a difference if you go like New Orleans. But as Nelly said, I'm going to explain just a little bit of how we're approaching this at CPNO. To move forward and so We are doing a few different things with this campaign. So we are focused on the federal infrastructure dollars, making sure we're using them as well as we can. We are doing a few different things. We are educating residents, educating stakeholders. This meeting that we're in right now is the second of a series that we're going Citywide Conversations, where we're trying to focus in on different sectors, bringing in different perspectives, trying to provide y'all an opportunity to actually ask some questions, get some answers. And we're hosting these online in a permanent fashion to where we're going to keep you updated on, when the city, when regional planning commissions applying for the tech program for those dollars. We're going to keep you updated at CBNO. We're going to be a sort of a hub and anchor point for you to follow, keep updated on these different programs. Then, so when you move the slide a little bit. Okay. Yeah. Actually, this is a slide. This is something we're actually quoting our mayor here. She makes a great point very often that these next few years are going to be decided, and the work that is going to be happening, the efforts, the vision that's put forward over the next 5 years. Then we're going to build out various infrastructure, build it with different other investments that we make in trying to lift up community, make sure the infrastructure is meeting the community where it is. And so as waters rise, as different effects happen, and we'll hear more about that from our panelists, what is the vision? What is it? What is the strategy? We know we're on a tipping clock. So we all need to educate ourselves, because there are lots of different plans existing in different places, but we need to make sure they're aligned and they come together and we understand what those plans are. So again, we're educating stakeholders. We're also gathering priorities from the community, and we're doing that mainly in a partnership that we're really excited about. We're working with a global platform, actually an international platform, Change, but they are based here in New Orleans, and it's a great platform that allows residents and just anyone in the community to basically, take pictures, make posts like any other social media platform, similar to Facebook, maybe Facebook posts. But we're trying to encourage hundreds, if not thousands, of our fellow residents and neighbors to take pictures, make posts, take sightings of, rain impacts, flooding in their area, tree coverage, condition of streets, condition of bridges, light, all sorts of their climate, their neighborhood realities, and to grow a data set that we can hopefully work with the city, work with the state, work with regional partners to have more residents actually actively involved in building stronger applications that actually direct resources to where they need to go. So if we know there's flooding way down in the cutoff in Algiers, if we have residents actually documenting that and adding to the data source, we can have more effective applications. And that feeds into the third thing, that third leg of what we're doing, which is to actually help strengthen these IGA applications. So we're trying to be a convener. We're trying to bring different public offices, city, who's going to be applying for the majority of these local projects, funds, projects. We're trying to work closely with them and trying to find out what the needs are, what the opportunities are to bring in community, and try to help direct and just strengthen those applications so we can maximize the opportunity. So, slide not really fancy here. So I will, if we might have some technical issues here, our meetings are a lot of fun. So I just went through that. But the next thing I wanted to do is actually open this conversation up and try to get some input from you all. We had these evaluation forms up here, and I do encourage everyone to fill these out. But since it seems like I only got a handful, I will talk through a little bit of this, but basically it's just a prompt for us to kind of situate ourselves here. These forms ask a few different questions. On the front is a series of questions about what you have seen in your neighborhood on your street regarding flooding and improvements that you made that you have or have not seen in New Orleans. and I'll read out the first question here. Are you aware of any examples of New Orleans streets being rebuilt or improved to reduce flooding? And yes, you have. You can actually name where that's taking place. You know where some products are. You've seen some actual real-life examples of that. Yes, you have seen it. Or you know of that, but you're not really sure what it's been, or you're not aware of any such progress. And then we have the question about whether your street itself floods or whether it doesn't flood in your neighborhood. So just since I don't think everyone filled these out, can I just get a show of hands? How many people, when there's a significant rain event, does it flood on your street? Okay, I'm looking at this thing. More than half. That's what I saw there. Okay. Well, if it doesn't flood on your street, does it flood anywhere in your neighborhood? Get a few more hands in that case. Okay, well, we're almost at 100%. Then, so that's a reality here in New Orleans. Let me go back to the first question. Who has seen an example of a street that has been improved or rebuilt to better handle stormwater, chronic flooding? Who's seen that? Okay. Planners, you've seen some of that. Okay, maybe about a third of the rest of the folks. Okay. Who has not seen an example of that? Has anyone not seen the street? See one, two,
Maybe I haven't.
yeah. Okay. Well, that's part of what we're trying to understand here is, I think a lot of folks who work in this space know, they certainly know about all the hard work that they have done and that some of their colleagues have done. But I think the actual cultural and societal awareness of that does matter a lot, especially because we know that over these next few years, there's going to have to be a lot of choices that have to be made. We're not getting an endless amount of funding. We're getting a lot, but there's so many choices that have to be made. So that means politics comes into play. Our communities, people who are leaders in our communities, we need to collectively have an understanding of what the plans are, what the visions are, so that it can be sustained over time. So that was the point of this. I do want to actually go to the other side. The other major piece of Protect, and we'll talk a little bit more about the program specifics a little later. But the other big piece focuses on evacuation routes. And there's different pieces to evacuation routes. There's the actual infrastructure that allows people to leave in a case of an emergency. Then there's kind of all of the political decision making around those moments in time. But I think it's fair to say that when a major storm event is happening, these are difficult moments for people. And even when they want to leave, it can be really hard to leave. And that's probably going to be harder over the years to come if, what they say about climate change is true. So, the impacts will be greater there. So raise your hand if you've been in a situation during a major weather event where you have needed to evacuate New Orleans. And raise your hand, it has been a difficult thing. Was it required to evacuate? Okay, but let me rephrase that a bit. Not just because it's hard and on the emotional level, it's hard to leave things in, out of your house, all that. Was it hard to physically get out of town? So let's see that. So that's a few hands, a smaller group of folks. So that's good. That's a little positive there. For you, another question you had was, can you think of other people in your life, in your family, in your that you might work with, who you know for a fact it will be truly hard for them to evacuate during a major event? Yeah, yes, vast majority. So this is why this matters. Just wanted to highlight that. I think we all know that evacuating in storm is difficult. It's not just actually getting out of town, it's all the other decision points around it. but then it is the actual physical act itself and meeting all people who need to go out. So that's a lot. There's a lot of planning around that and a lot of work that has to be done. That is also part of this Protect program. Okay, so I'm going to stop this part of the conversation, move us forward to hear from our different presenters. I'm going to take these folks and just balance this right here. So first up is Gary Vorhoff, who is the Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities. And, you know, Harry, I'm going to let you define exactly what you're talking about today. But I think it's just wanted to say, you know, it's really great to have you here. And for us here at CBNO, we've mainly been working with city and city council and then residents. So, but we know that the state plays a crucial role and controls places with money, just to be clear about this, and has, you know, a lot of decision-making power. So it's great to have you here, and I'll let you just open up what you're going to talk about and what the slides for
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Good evening, everybody. So, as Ron mentioned, I'm in the Coastal Office, the Governor's Office. So, focus mainly on doing policy and intergovernmental work around the state's coastal program. So, raise a hand that you've heard of the Coastal Master Plan. So, pretty good familiarity. First half of my slide deck is about basics of the Coastal Master Plan, so we can race through them. And then kind of look into or pivot into sort of all the resilience and adaptation that isn't included in this comprehensive Coastal Master Plan, because while it is impressive effort, it is not all inclusive. So with that, go to the next slide, please. So, you know, typically, let's start these discussions just with kind of a reality check. You know, we've lost 2,000 square miles over the last, you know, let's say 70 years. We're set to, you know, we do nothing just in the face of subsidence and sea level rise. We'll lose more than 4,000 square miles. So that's a significant amount of land loss, and you can see the red where it is. Well, it has happened and still happen. Next slide, please. And that really correlates with the reds, the purples here, which are the floodnets. And so when you lose land, you get more reduced flooding, right? And so even though, you know, New Orleans has this levee system, you know, surrounding, you know, it's gray, and you know, you have the levees, but all around it, you know, there is coastal land loss. So one of the problems is New Orleans, you know, coastal system, and of course, it's even though you're protected or feel protected behind the levees, you see it every year. Storms, you know, it just have to go up. So we're right. The next slide. And so this is just zooming in to just focus in on the region. Point, and also, you know, time back to protect, you know, evacuation routes. You know, so when here the storm comes in and the storm surge comes up, you know, the evacuation routes can be cut off or are in danger of getting cut off. So that's the focus of this protect funding, and so that's where the state intends to focus its efforts. Next slide, please.
Can you speak up a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So the Coastal Master Plan, after Katrina and Rita, the state completely reorganized how it does flood protection. They created a new statewide authority, pulling in authorities from DOTD, the Department of Transportation and Development, the Department of Natural Resources. You know, it consolidated a lot of the levee boards into regional flood authorities that you have in Greater New Orleans on the East Bank and the West Bank to just try to be more science-based, reality-based in terms of how you design your systems, that they should be designed around the boulders and levee systems that, geographically exist. There was a real effort to focus on collecting as much and creating as much data, students, science, developing the state-of-the-art science around coastal land loss subsidence, around engineering and design of things like levees, because we couldn't rely on the Army Corps of Engineers to design it for us. And so, that had been ever since the state's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority was created in 2006. It created its first coastal master plan in 2007. Has been periodically updated in 2012. We're currently in the 2017 one, but we will have a new 2023 one this upcoming spring/summer. So constantly updating. And next slide, please. And so the current 2017 master plan has 124 projects in them. They are selected to optimize. It's basically a $25 billion planning budget for restoration projects, a $25 billion planning budget for protection projects, and optimizing what will have the most impacts spread across the coast to protect or reduce risk, I should say, to our coastal communities, to restore those ecosystems that our coastal communities rely upon, not only for to reduce storm surge, but also to provide livelihoods and recreation and just a way of life. So, if we implement those projects, we do not have $50 billion, and we have about $8 billion really because of the EP oil spill, largely, and then some other really largely oil and gas revenues that come from state waters as well as offshore. But if we implement this project fully, or this coastal master plan fully, it should reduce flood damages by $150 billion. It should create or sustain 802 square miles. Next slide. And so I just want to focus in on just the projects around Greater New Orleans or even New Orleans. And so you can see on the left, you have the red land loss projected out over the next 50 years. That's a lot of outside of the levee system, right? It's a coastal march that's expected to really erode and just succumb to sea level rise. And then you see the flood depth as well. And so really, there's a 32% loss of the parish land area over the next 50 years and 400 million. I'm not sure why it's EAD, but it's economic damage. There's pretty. Next slide, please. Sorry. But we are on the next slide. We are in the midst of constructing a lot of the So you can see implementing the projects in the Orleans area. You can reduce that land loss by 83%. You're not going to prevent all the land loss. And then you're also going to reduce $70 billion of annual damages by year, like halfway through the 50-year planning horizon, and then $200 billion per year reduction in damages, and that's really largely from major storm events, avalanche damage. So it's not $200 billion every year. It's just when it does hit, it is billions of dollars, right? And at the bottom, that's just the different types of projects that are identified for New Orleans, even the master plans, remote creation projects, special and protection projects, non-structural, where you're elevating homes and flood-proofing, and then some structural projects, which are largely the ring levees around New Orleans. Next slide, please. And so these are the projects. So New Orleans, if you can recall, the New Orleans East, Wrigley's area was heavily red, and it's expected to have a lot of land loss outside of the Chandler Islands. So major project is the New Orleans East Land Bridge restoration, which is currently underway. Like I said, taking of it. marsh creation projects, the central wetlands and golden triangle. One of those is underway, the other is in just got a grant, a federal grant for planning and design. And then we certainly have, the Army Corps is still doing levee limits before they turn it over to the flood authorities for the greater levee system around New Orleans, East Bay, West Bay. So these are some of the, not all the projects are funded fully. We're still kind of working on that. But really, New Orleans is not just sitting in isolation. It is significantly benefited by a lot of the restoration projects that are occurring around it. So we are very close to getting a permitting decision on the area sediment diversion, which would be due south of here in Highlands Parish, which would divert Mississippi River water to build marsh in a way that kind of mimics nature, right? Every year it'll flood and it'll deposit sediment. And that provides, that not only benefits the ecosystem and the estuary, which is in very rapid decline because it's been cut off from the Mississippi River, but it also creates that land that kind of acts as that first line of defense against storm surge. So that's critical. There's a lot of marsh creation projects, large scale, hundreds of acres of marsh creation where they dredge, from the bottom of the Mississippi or from offshore sediment, and then they quickly build land. And so that's a kind of quick hit to get a lot of new or restored acres. And so that, in combination with the diversion, it'll be a smaller footprint. We're not going to have the same footprint in South Louisiana that we had 100 years ago. But can we have a more sustainable, healthy estuary and coastal ecology? That is the goal. So next slide, please. So there's a project I mentioned, a lot of marsh creation projects have been regularly addressed east. Next slide, please. Since this is a protect now, I wanted to just call out the blue you can see is coastal flooding, and the red is just the network of at-risk roadways. So you can see these roadways so very far out into what is now water. It's not surrounded by as much marsh as it used to be. And really, over the next 50 years, the risk to in terms of number of miles of roadway and expected cost is expected to double. And that's in the face of rising seas, stronger storms that just lead these roadways, which are often the only roadway to get out, to get north, just a more strand. Next slide, please. And so this is just an example of one kind of project that the state has been doing, and they completed the first increment so this is due south of us. There's LA1, goes all the way down to Fort Bouchon, and then over to Grand Isle. Fort Bouchon is the busiest port in the country that services offshore oil and gas, and it is kind of a critical component for folks living on Grand Isle to evacuate. That's the only roadway to get out. So DOT is elevating that roadway. It is using some of the protected funding for 2022 to do the second increment. It's about 14 miles of elevated roadway that was basically at risk during a storm or in anticipation of a storm from getting flooded out. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of the Rosier picture. If we fully implement the coastal master plan, there's still a lot of red. There's more green, which is the land sustained and regained. Just to kind of underscore, we're not going to put it all back together. It's not going to be what it was 100 years ago. It's going to be a smaller footprint. And so, not in recognition of that, the state and the donor really made kind of filling in the gaps an important part of this second second term. So that's looking at resilience more broadly than the coastal master plan. And so he created the state's first ever chief resilience officer, Charles Sutcliffe, who really is focusing on adapting how we govern. So we're not governing in silos. So the agencies aren't just working in silos. And part of that is, kind of going from the coast up, where you're drawing on the data and the projections that are in the coastal master plan and making sure that all the agencies know what's in there, because they're not always looking, and that they're building projects that are responsive. That they're building, that they know they're building a floodplain if they're building a floodplain, that they know this area is expected to have significant mammals, over the next 50 years, where they know that there's an anticipated project right here to, reduce risk to community, a certain community. So that's kind of bringing down silos is something that Governor really has been focusing on in the second term especially. Next slide, please. And so, this kind of underscores a lot going on here. So starting at the top, there's, all the different coastal changes. So storm, sea level rise, land change, salinity coming in, further and further north. And that impacts each and every one of those impacts, infrastructure, it affects people's daily lives, it has economic disruption, and, causes environmental damage. And each and one of those kind of consequences, the state, there's a handful of different state agencies that has a piece of that pie to try to address those issues, right? And so they're very much overlapping. It's very messy, and I think that's what this is really trying to underscore. It is if we're not all talking to each other, and this isn't just within the state, it's among all the stakeholders, among every member of the public. If we're not all on the same sheet of music, then it's going to be chaos. The next slide, please. So this is part of the kind of adaptive governance initiative that we're working on, just to assess where our agencies are vulnerable, where they're kind of out of step with another agency, or they're not kind of paying attention to the changing climate or to the changing situation on the ground, that will help them to kind of build up resilience plans within the state, including DOT, which will certainly have a role to protect, and thinking about resilience planning to reduce some of the state's cost share or protect, because if you have a resilience plan, you could reduce your cost share by 7%. And so kind of making sure that we're thinking ahead, especially in the out years. So, 2023, 2024, 2025, to spend down that money, which takes, so we're not just pulling off of, the long list of backlog projects, but we're also thinking ahead of, well, what are some of the new projects, how do we engage folks and see what, do we need to reprioritize. Next slide. Just some of the questions, kind of as we're talking about, sort of, I think you can skip this and just kind of go to the next presenter. But just sort of,
You want to talk about modality?
just how do you capture as many co-benefits with this funding? How do you address as many problems, at once? I think it's really the point to sort of thinking about that kind of differently than just, okay, well, what roadways, what flood, and how do we prioritize just based on straight up flood levels? Do we want to think a little more broadly about resilience? I'll leave it there. Thank you overall.
Thank you, Jerry. Good stuff. And if folks do have questions, we're going to go through and then we'll ask some questions after. There we go. So what I heard from that is that Grand Isle's going the first to the money. That's right.
I hope that's not a scoop, but
that's fine. Okay, well, thanks again, Harry. Next up, Tom Haysley from the Regional Planning Commission, and talk about how they're approaching.
Sure. So while they're pulling up the slides, I'm a principal planner at the Regional Planning Commission. I just want to talk to you a little bit about what we have done so far and what we're planning to do in terms of resilience generally. But first, if we can go to the next slide. If you're not familiar with what the Regional Planning Commission is, I know a lot of people aren't. We are a government agency. We serve the 8 parishes around the Greater New Orleans region. So we do regional planning in the areas of transportation, economic development, we have environmental programs. We also have a pretty large data and mapping program. And I'd say about 2/3 of our work is within that transportation realm. And what we do there is we are a federally designated metropolitan planning organization, an acronym you don't need to know. But what that means is that federal funds that come through the transportation bills that are passed every 4 to 5 years get funneled to the state, and then they get funneled to our region, and our agency helps determine how those funds are spent on transportation projects. So a lot of that goes to things like maintenance, roadway repaving, intersection redesigns, but also those are things like adding in new bike lanes and multi-use paths, things like that. So if we go to the next slide. We're talking about resilience. I want to go over some of the things that we've done recently and some of the things we're doing right now. So in 2019, we did not have any kind of mandate or funding to do resilience planning, but we recognized the need for it. So we conducted a regional transportation resilience analysis. And really what that was is we looked at all the plans that had been done in our region by cities, parishes, even the state regarding resilience of the transportation system, and kind of found what the gaps were in those plans, who's doing what and who's not doing what, and then figuring out what the RPC could do to fill in those gaps based on our own competencies and our own, legislative authorities. And so we kind of figured out through that we need to be documenting and studying our vulnerabilities. We need to be recognizing and prioritizing what a resilient transportation system is. And then as an agency, we need to be a steward for transportation resilience, and not just a steward, but a leader for transportation resilience in our region. And I'll talk more about what that means to us today in a little bit. But we are also working on the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. If you're not familiar with that program, that came about mainly after the 2016 floods that we had stabilized. Governor Edwards issued an executive order kind of dictated or asking state agencies to work together better to recognize that planning for flood mitigation and flood prevention needs to be done at a cross-jurisdictional level. It can't just be done by single state agencies or single parishes or cities. So it set up these 8 regions statewide to attempt to do regional floodplain planning. And there was also $1.2 billion in flood funding dedicated to that program for actual implementation of infrastructure projects. Unfortunately, most of the parishes in our region are not eligible for that funding because they were not declared state of emergencies during 2016 floods. However, we do have planning funding that comes to us through that. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as well. We at the RBC have done several ad hoc studies and improvements over time related to improving transportation resilience. And that's mainly on project by project level. So for example, last year we studied a roadway in St. John Parish looking at the potential for adding green infrastructure to a state highway. And that was actually a fairly major step because the state has not really jumped into green infrastructure very much. So to get them to agree to add green infrastructure to a highway was a major step for us, even if it hasn't been built yet. We also, as an example, have a project in Plaquemines Parish to raise LA 39 near the Carnival levee, where the roadway clearly goes in the water, and that's a major issue for evacuation. That people are literally trapped in the southern end of Plaquemines Parish and can't get out with that roadway to water. People drive on the levee to get out. So other related things we do, not necessarily directly on the transportation system, but to hopefully contribute to resilience in some way. We do recognize the need to address climate change, so we do a lot of alternative transportation projects, like encouraging biking infrastructure, helping to fund that, pedestrian infrastructure. The recent New Links redesign of the transit system, we were a major player behind that study. We also have environmental programs such as Clean Cities, where we are hoping to build out our state's alternative fuel infrastructure, particularly now with a lot of funding going towards EV charging. We also, in our economic development program, are hoping to get grants for many of our economic development agencies here in the region to do things like workforce development to help build the workforce around a greener economy, things like building the hydrogen infrastructure, building workforce for EV charging, and even things like building training programs for mechanics to work with electric vehicles, things like that. So related to building resilience, mitigating climate change, that's kind of really a core focus of ours with all of our programs right now. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is we recently passed our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We passed that in August. And it identifies 6 priorities for our region. And one of those is resilience and sustainability. So our board agreed that should be kind of a core focus of us as an agency. And that the MTP is our principal planning document that we update every 4 to 5 years. So to have the board kind of agree that is an important step for us to say that, yes, that is something that we need to be focusing on as an agency. So if we could go to the next slide. Looking forward, some of the new opportunities that we're looking at. There is the PROTECT program within the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the PROTECT program, so there's 2 components in terms of funding. There's formula funding, wherein states will definitely receive a certain amount of money every year. Louisiana will receive $135 million over 5 years. There's also a discretionary program that will be coming out where states, cities, and parishes can apply directly for funds to the federal government. We don't have a guidance on that yet. In fact, many of the programs within the bill, we don't have a guidance on yet. It takes a long time for these things to come out, even though it was passed a year ago. We don't know what the rules are yet. So we will let everybody know when we find out. But that program will directly fund the infrastructure improvements. One of the important things that the guidance that we have for PROTECT emphasizes is that it should fund kind of either projects that are entirely built meant for improving resilience, such as raising LA1, or you can add on to an existing project a resilience element. So, for example, if we're going to improve an intersection that's part of our regular transportation program, perhaps we can find some way to improve drainage or add some green infrastructure to that. That's what a PROTECT will fund. And that can go a little bit further into things like making sure we improve evacuation, improve community resilience. We talk a lot about flooding here because that's the thing that we're focused on most. But it does include other hazards as well. But I'm going to keep talking about that. But PROTECT can actually fund some things that could not just improve transportation resilience, but community resilience as well. But we are not just looking at PROTECT. It's $135 million over 5 years. Harry's talking about $50 billion. We need to be looking at other things as well. So one of the things we're looking at is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. That's the main funding source that we have used for many years to fund our transportation projects. So everything from repaving a roadway to rebuilding a bridge, we use those kind of funds. In the past, when it came to resilience and flooding, we could really only use that money to do work to get water off the roadway. After that, kind of those funds didn't care. So as long as it was off the roadway, that was it. Now with the bill, the infrastructure law, that widened eligibility so that now we can use those funds to actually help to improve community resilience beyond just the roadway or the transportation facility. And that's important, not just because it can fund a project, but because that's long-term money. We get that every year. We've gotten it every year for decades. It's gone up a little bit every year. So while Protect is a one-time great program, if it's renewed every 5 years, we know that we're going to be getting STG for the foreseeable future. It would be a pretty major change for Congress to do that. So that eligibility to be there is, it's great to be able to do really big projects, but also it's great to be able to do incremental changes in every little project that we do. Remind myself where I'm at. The other thing we have coming up is the LWI Capacity Building Grant Phase 2. That doesn't necessarily provide project funding, but it does provide planning funding. We'll talk about what that plan is in just a second. We're also monitoring other opportunities such as the STORM Act, which is for state and local infrastructure, flooding improvements or flooding reduction. BRIC funds critical infrastructure, that's $1 billion over 5 years. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program helps. It will provide $3.5 billion over 5 years. This is nationwide for reducing repetitive flood damage to local governments. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge, another huge program. We can get another panel about addressing climate change. Apologize if that's all quick. But with that, we can kind of go on to the next slide. And I'll tell you about what we are actually planning on doing as an agency with all these opportunities and what we've done before. We've got two different but related plans that we're working on. The first is just the Restoring Our Resilience Plan. We haven't come up with a catchier name for it yet, but that's what it is today. So the first purpose of this will be to follow the Protect guidance. Now, the Protect guidance is pretty simple, really. It's telling states to identify what the risks and the vulnerabilities are for the transportation system, and then to identify what projects and strategies they will use to address those vulnerabilities, and to identify the funding that they'll use. So we're going to do that. The state is going to be doing that as well. We are not mandated to do it, but we're going to do it anyways. But we're going to go pretty far beyond that and use this as an opportunity to establish our actual resilience planning program, going back to our 2019 plan or analysis that we need to be a steward and a leader when it comes to regional resilience planning. We're not just going to identify what the vulnerabilities are on the roadway. We want to identify what the related issues are, not just where it floods, but how is subsidence contributing to that? How does the tree canopy contribute to use of public transit and walking and biking and heat islands? So we're going to be trying to dive into all of these related issues to the extent that we can relate it back to what we can do. And then we're also hoping to turn this into kind of a resource for all of our partners regionally. Every parish in our region is on our board. We want to be able to make sure that we can provide data to them, that we can provide information, that we can help them, seek out funding and opportunities to do projects. So with that, it's going to take us about 15 to 18 months, and we're really just now getting started. So if we go to the next slide, the other plan that we're working on is the LWI Regional Watershed Plan. That is driven by LWI at the state level. They're asking each of the regions, we're in Region 8 down there. They're asking each of the regions to come up with a watershed plan It is much more specifically focused on just flooding as opposed to all hazards, and identifying policies and projects that will help to reduce flooding. So we're going to relate those two things back to each other. Probably the LWI plan will be nested within our regional resilience plan, but that one has a longer time frame, driven by the grant itself over 36 months. But again, that would be much more specifically focused on flood reduction and infrastructure. Then, if we can go on to the next slide. To accomplish all that, we're going to be establishing a resilience advisory committee that'll be kind of informing us. We're going to be working with the state on their plan because they need to come up with a protect plan. And we're going to be incorporating all this into our broader programs that I talked about earlier. And to kind of wrap it up on the next slide, I have some just final thoughts on where I stand, or not where I stand, where I'm thinking are on this. Our key considerations here are that, we as an agency don't just need to be looking at the physical vulnerability of our transportation system. We have to be looking at the social vulnerabilities as well. It's not just about does the roadway flood, it's how does that flooding impact people's lives? And who is most vulnerable to that flooding? Who is impacted the most? So we're working on ways to identify that and ways to let us know, where we need to be focusing our energies the most. So one thing we've developed is a social vulnerability index based on a CDC model that takes into account things like socioeconomic status, household composition, minority status, household type, housing type, and transportation availability. We're going to be using data like that to help us not just find out again where a roadway floods, but who is most impacted by flooding. And I'm talking about flooding, I'm talking about roads, but it's all hazards. It's who needs the most assistance with evacuation. What are the impacts of our projects going to be on this community versus this community? Also, we're kind of touching on what Perry was saying earlier. We guys have broad scope of resilience. It's not just about one topic. We can talk about a road flooding at the RPC and trying to address that, but that very quickly gets into how does the subsidence affect our transportation system? That's not necessarily something that we as an agency can fix, but we need to be talking to people who might have some impact on some subsidence. We do not run evacuation programs, but we work with transit agencies. We work with the state, we work with cities who may be running those. It very quickly spins out into much more things than just one system. So we need to be defining the roles and responsibilities. I think like curious spaghetti model there. I might steal that because it's really where my thinking is as well, in that there are so many different topics and so many different agencies involved, but it's all related. And we really need to be kind of working together on this, because just one agency like mine working on transportation infrastructure is not going to solve the problem. So that's why we're trying to have an advisory committee. That's why we want to be doing things like this, so we can kind of get out there and facilitate communication. That was really quick.
All right, okay. Thank you, Tom. Regional Planning Commission does a lot, y'all. I think that's clear. Appreciate that. Aron Chang is up next. He does not have slides, and so he's going to have to maybe do. But yeah, go ahead. I just want to, thank Aron for being here. He's been involved in, educating all sorts of folks around New Orleans about how living with water, what it means, and how we can, take action on it. So, thank you for it.
Thanks, Rob. It's really a treat to be here. a lot of people I know parts of my life here in New Orleans. So I was just thinking Tom Bradley were supposed to connect like 6 years ago. And so so I think I've been joking with my friends that I want to start a campaign called Stop Building Shit. And seriously, like there's just so much, there's always changes to build, to take action to build stuff, especially when it comes to infrastructure. And all of the systems are set up to prioritize building in tangible results. And it's very easy to say, like, we need to do this, we need to act, we need to be building stuff to protect. And the models with which we, as government planning bodies, engineers, designers, make decisions about what to build and what not to build are all rooted in economic models where you have to be able to quantify the value that's created when you build something. And so it's very easy, or it's relatively easy to say, if I just this highway, I'll generate X million dollars over the next 30 years or 50 years. It's very hard to talk about social factors and to say we've invested in democratic decision-making processes, or we've invested in more equitable decision-making processes. And so what ends up happening over and over again is hundreds of millions, tens of billions of dollars go to different cities and regions, and the bulk of the money goes to what's seen as part of infrastructure. And so when I say stop building shit, I mean that it is also what I fear. You all shared that quote about Latoya saying, what we do in the next 5 years will matter with the citizen. What I fear working on water issues here in this region is that we'll look back in 50 years and say, what did we do? We can spend 20 billion, we can spend 50 billion, and we cannot change anything fundamental about how we got into the situation in the first place, how we end up in a city half which is below sea level, how we end up in a city where we spend over $50 billion a year pumping stormwater, and that is the number one cause of subsidence that Thomas talked about in the New Orleans region. And so I'm just going to draw on the situation of roads in this city to try to illustrate what I mean by that. And so some of the categories I wanted to talk about in terms of, and so the thing to keep in mind is that we are spending tons of money. We got $2 billion off third application done from FEMA to rebuild roads, so that's still underway. Project management issues aside, that's one thing. What I'm talking about here is design plans. We received $141 million from HUD for the Gentilly Resilience District. Much of that goes to roadway programs in Gentilly. And then we have another probably $150 million for hazard mitigation projects on Chile. You may have heard of Paving the Feet. So that's building great gardens and bump outs and different things like that. And then there are also people like Angela Talk, Healthy Community Services, people who are doing amazing grassroots work to change how streets function. At the end of the day, though, the FEMA funds go to rebuilding streets as they were. And I don't think anyone is making a map and quantifying this. I'm looking at Joe, maybe Kelsey, you guys could help with this. If we talk, every single project starts with the premise that every resilience project starts with the premise that it's going to help reduce the amount of stormwater runoff and therefore subsidence, the load on the pump station, so on and so forth. I have a sinking feeling that we quantify all the hard work to build green infrastructure, and then we compare that to all the work that's gone into just rebuilding. I live in Central City every single day, and you lot of concrete and asphalt is being re-poured, or once green strips are being covered over with concrete. Nobody's actually stepping back and saying, have we actually reduced the amount of total impermeability in the city? Have we actually changed fundamental runoff characteristics? Nobody's asking that question for Matt. And I would bet we put more into core concrete than we have into planting trees, because a lot of the green infrastructure efforts that are actually completed are done by grassroots organizations and nonprofits relative to the billions that are being spent on pouring asphalt and concrete. So material-wise, what have we really changed? We still build utilities in the same way. And then at the city planning scale, what has really changed? Have we addressed in thinking about roadways? Have we thought about the footprint question? Where should we be building roads? We still have roads going out to the footprint of a city that was built out, drained, and developed for a population of over 600,000 people. We're still below 400,000 people, but we haven't made any decisions about what the footprint of the city should be. And so we're still presuming that this footprint needs to be what it is. We've built our levee systems for that. We've built our roadways for that. We've built all our utilities. And there are very direct consequences in St. Bernard Parish. Maybe you heard about the braiding amoeba. If you have pipes and you have stuff that it is more than you can maintain, things fall apart. Water was sitting stagnant in St. Bernard Parish pipes, and braiding amoeba were able to grow, and somebody died. And so St. Bernard Parish had to install automatic flushers to keep the water, because there's not enough people flushing their toilets in St. Bernard Parish, right? So you look at all the roads and the dumping in the roads in New Orleans East or in the areas of the city that haven't been rebuilt. And so there's a very basic question about what should the footprint of the city be? What is the ideal population of the city? That isn't being questioned despite billions of dollars of investment. Our car dependency, our relationship to highways, our dependency on highways as evacuation routes, none of that is being challenged. Yes, there's work on bike lanes. Yes, there's work on complete streets, but the fundamental relationship that we have to cars and how that relates to housing, work, that isn't being challenged. And then culturally, we use the word resilience a lot. I bet if we ask each person in this room what resilience means, we'd get pretty different answers. And we haven't had it's not like we have a collective, deeper shared narrative of what forms of resilience we're building towards. And that is guiding policy and grassroots action, top down and bottom up. Flooding, to me, that's one of this word flooding. We live in a delta city that's created by the flow of water. If half the city is below sea level, when it rains, there's going to be water in the streets. And so the very basic premise that when it rains, there should be water in the streets, that's something, it's not for me to say like that is or isn't flooding or you should believe this or that. But collectively, have we shifted? Have we actually engaged this question of what does it mean to flood in this environment? Because as soon as you call it flooding, the general media coverage, policy, and elected official coverage of what flooding is that it's negative, it's bad, it's something you're trying to do away with, which is what Sturgeon Water has been tasked with doing for over 100 years. And that's how we ended up with a city that's below sea level, because we're pumping that water out. And so that map that Harry showed, where we have all the reds and the yellows, and greens of land that's sinking away, and the flood risk from a future storm, that map shows New Orleans and Metairie as being white. That's not reality. I'm not saying it's a bad map, but what I'm saying is that is predicated on massive expenditures of money and fossil fuels to pretend that that line is not below sea level. So today, sunny all day, hasn't rained, a single drop. There have been pumps cycling on and off throughout the entire day to keep this bowl from filling up with water, because so much of the city is below sea level. So if we're doing all this, if we're spending tens of hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in tranches of funding, some of which are termed resilience, but we're not questioning or in moving forward collectively as to what resilience looks like, what sustainability looks like, what the causes of science are. Do we collectively have an idea about how we want to fight subsidence? And then culturally, like, what is the neutral ground? All these things really should be questioned, but it is much easier politically, and also, like, just as a person to not have to always be answering those questions. So I think it's very easy to kick that can down the road over and over again, and to just focus on we're investing X billion, we're investing X billion. So what I would say is, how do we start to ask that question of what have we actually accomplished with that X billion? And to not just take the word that, like, if we say we've invested 10 billion in resilience or this or that, that actually has fundamentally changed anything about the city, anything about the region. I worked on the urban water plant, which started various 10 years ago, from 2011 to 2013. If miraculously $6 billion appeared out of the blue to implement the entire urban water plant, which is about green infrastructure and climate adaptation, we would still flood from a storm. So, but because that plan itself doesn't challenge the basic premises of where we live, how we live, what our expectations are when it rains in a Delta city. And so I think, like, when I say stop building stuff, it's also a way of deferring the harder conversations. It's really hard. If $1 billion had come in today, I think 10 years ago, I would have been all in on like, oh, we need to spend some portfolio streets, parks, and evacuation is structural, non-structural. We could spend all day trying to find the perfect formula, how to rationally spend that billion. But I truly believe we spent that billion on actually figuring out how do we collectively make those really hard decisions and not just perpetuating the status quo. The really hard decision about footprints, the really hard decision about what flooding, what the role, what the presence of water should be. It's a cultural question. It's an economic question. It's very much a political question. But we continually default to using an economic lens for figuring out what we're going to do. And we end up just continually avoiding asking really hard questions. And so I think because of that, I can look back on the last 10 years where there's been so much fraught around green infrastructure, living with water. And I don't believe we've really shifted much. There's projects to point to. But when half the city is below sea level, we're actually encouraging people to invest in areas that are below sea level. What are we actually doing? And that question has to be asked because it has to do with this human life and safety and property and all the things that we purport to care about.
Right, it's a lot of questions. Definitely want to open up the floor to y'all's questions and just, I know we got a lot of talking there. Harry laid out the same vision for the whole coast, about the region, plugging gaps, and then answering questions. So, well, the way we were going to do this is actually try to make it to where the virtual audience could still hear your questions. So, if you have a question, will you come? That will still work, right, Toby? Will you come over to the stand where Toby is, not like our virtual audience can see if he can hear you? And then we have some other questions from the virtual audience as well. But Larry, why don't you come up here?
I have a question about, it's a loaded question. Feel free not to ask question. I was curious about, especially, I was curious before Aron spoke about the Wall Street crowd. When there's no more JD in office, and people that they have come here and deny that COVID even existed, what will happen to our progress, whatever might not be inclined, and some of these things that we talk about today. Has anyone got into their mind, or do they lose hope alone in state government? Can they go out and do whatever they just pretend like y'all not there? What happens to with the progress we have made when people leave and come with their different ideas? Here's how state government works.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it kind of depends on the specific area you're talking about. So, with respect to the state's coastal restoration and protection program that pre-existed John Bell, it goes back to 2007 and earlier. And that is, the state's coastal master plan, the annual plans that are funded every year are passed unanimously in the state legislature. And so that I think that is universal or near universally accepted as okay, there's good government, good projects, good good for the state. With respect to the climate initiative that the governor rolled out as a secure priority, and all the work we've done in terms of engaging folks and stakeholders to come up with the state's first ever coastal or climate action plan. I think part of the approach we took was to engage everybody, build as big of a tent as possible, and try to take the politics out of it to where it was not, or at least from what I was hearing, from the legislature, from others, you didn't really hear this, we need to just trash this, or we need to dump the topic. I think we tried to be as broad as possible in terms of who's at the table, and hopefully that we're getting more and more momentum with the whole range of political spectrums, ideologies, and geographies. It's not just the coast. It's North Louisiana has issues with drought, and it's going to face more severe drought in the future. And extreme heat days. I mean, it's the whole state. It affects everybody, and I think you're seeing some of that is conservative. You can't deny that we had two of the strongest, before this year, we had two of the strongest or most intense hurricane seasons on record. And, that you just see it. So you can't deny it. And I think that's it's just hard to deny when you're actually seeing it right before your eyes. I think that's why the state, the coastal program, you can't deny that, this was land and now it's water. Now it's called the water. This is marsh, and now it's open water. And then, resilience also, from what we're seeing, people appreciate it. I think you're talking about the legislature, the next governor, whoever that is, hopefully sees that the work that's being done is productive, that it's putting the people of the state in a better position than they were before. So maybe that's just rose-colored glasses, and I'm not sure. But I think part of the effort is to engage as many people in this state as possible to make them ambassadors of climate, of resilience, of coastal restoration. And so it's not just this top-down, it's a bottom-up as well approach. And so whoever the next governor is, they don't see it as something that's a bad policy that's not popular. They see it as something that is widely accepted and that's important for the state's longevity.
And so, Monica, do you have a question from the virtual crowd?
I do. Where would you like me to go?
Now just read it out.
Read it. Okay. The question is from John. I'm sorry, I don't see your name, last name. Right, John mentioned he's concerned here, New Orleans here, about our industrial canal plan to do a dangerous project for navigation that will increase river levels into the state 12 more blocks as improvement for barge traffic while not considering alternative sites because of ownership. That's the block. He's in an audience, he's in the virtual audience, he can probably articulate that clearer. But yeah, gentlemen,
So I assume that's referring to the block widening proposal. Unfortunately, that is not the project that our agency is a part of. We're not a decision-making agency in that. So I will not try to defer blame to somebody else. But what I can say is projects like that, that's a very big project, are exactly the kinds of things that I was talking about. We need to have greater communication and interagency communication, interdisciplinary communication.
Tom, can you be clear about what projects that is?
So okay, now my project. So it's my understanding that the locks in the industrial canal There's been discussion for many decades of widening those locks so that larger ships can pass through the canal. And it has really been talked about for decades. Interest has gone up and down over years, and right now there is renewed interest in doing that again. So that's largely a conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers. But having said that decision-making authority over that's out of our hands, I do think that we could have a role in pulling more people into the conversation and inserting ourselves into the conversation a little bit more about not just what are the transportation impacts of this, the transportation agency, but what are the impacts to the community in terms of bringing more river water further up the canal, things like that. Those are exactly the kinds of things that we are hoping to be more involved with. So I think specific to that project, I'm happy to groups that within my agency that's kind of helping me further be involved. Because we've only been involved tangentially. I think that's bad. I kind of think that we need to be better involved.
Let's actually, if you're so we can move back to the first question.
Sure.
Sorry, did you? I think going back to the first question, just thinking about the relationship with different levels of government, I really want a better state government, right? As all of us here do. I think looking at recent history, it's interesting where actions are taking place. You look at Angela's efforts, you look at Sankofa's wet in the Lower Ninth Ward, you look at the Lincoln Beach effort, where grassroots activists are through cleaning up a beach, creating enough leverage to force city government to find $10+ million in funding. I think, especially in a place where I think we can create all the plans that we want, but when you get an INA and that hits and you have to completely reform social networks to figure out how to get things done, I think the real spaces for action we don't have the stability where I think you can make 10, 30, 50-year plans and count on a functioning state government to see things through. A lot of the big projects I've been a part of, seen so many planning efforts that looks great, and but if it hinges on the government being exactly who you need to be, we're seeing things that there's so many plans that are sitting on shelves around the entire country because we don't have $2 billion for that, we don't have $5 billion, we don't have $20 million for that, and so the very modes of what taking action, what creating leverage, how to change things. You go the Gentility Zones District, the city received $141 million in 2017. And right now there's more that's been done by grassroots efforts in the Lower Ninth Ward by Sankofa redevelopment than by a project that received $141 million. And so I think it's not saying I don't believe government is going to do work but I think how change comes about, I think we have to not just put all our eggs and say if John Bell is gone, there's no chance of progress. I think people are finding ways to create leverage, finding spaces for action and movement that are, I think, really impressive and exciting and hard to sustain. And so we have to look for ways to support that and find ways to make some of the top-down things that aren't working either relevant or pull them into a more useful kind of mode.
I would 100% agree with that, and just underscore that I think the real value of the climate action plan was that over the 15-month planning period, we had 49 public meetings and we had several rounds of public comment, and just the engagement and creating a platform and a space for people to engage and share how they think the state should address climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, I think that is the most value that's provided because you could very well just sit on the shelf after a year or so. But people have and it'll exist. So.
Any other questions from the room here? Okay. Oh yeah. So I can just hang out. Angela, go ahead.
Now that Aron has called me out twice, and I'm gonna call Nan out as a result of that, because Nan is one of the funders that makes a lot of these projects happen here in our city by working in the Wellness Project. But I just wanted to point out that what you say and what's the best practices that's happening all across the country now. And it's just slower in our state and in our region and in our city that best practices are co-create and co-lead with community organizations with the government. When the Waterwise Gulf South Collective mission, the Earth Economics Report, to look at another metric of what our green infrastructure projects were valued at. We were measuring our value of our stormwater interventions in stormwater storage capacity. But what we found with that report from Earth Economics, and they're a leading organization in the country that values levels of public health accountable or recognized and accountable to green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. What we found is that across the Waterwise Gulf South, 100 projects that we actually have in the ground, 6 communities, 6 African-American communities, led by 6 African-American community organizations. Those projects have deep service benefits of $17 million annually. And so when you start to look at the return on investment that we've put in the ground with providing stormwater management that reduces the effects of climate change, more intense, more frequent flooding caused by more intense urban flooding, that's a significant impact to our community. $17 million annually, and that report was just commissioned last year. The other point to it is that now across those 6 neighborhoods, we're managing 100 projects to the stormwater capacity of 100,000 gallons of water per rain event, and the largest one to date is on state property at North Claiborne and St. Bernard Avenues. That project has managed 35,000 gallons per rain event. So it's community organizations that are leading this effort, not because we want to shame government, it's because we have to, because if we don't, we're drowning. And what we need for government to do is to work with us, co-create and co-lead. And what has happened unprecedented in our country with the federal monies that are coming down across every federal agency. They're working to remove those barriers of language and technology in order for Black, Brown, and communities to be able to access that money. Something as simple as language. Scientists have a different language for community organizations and applying community science. So my advice to folks is to become involved, and you be that change in your community. Get involved, just as the 175 Native champions across the Waterwise also collectively have a network of 175 individuals in 16 groups that are making a change. Thank
you. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, her organization, Waterwise, does really great work. I think there's Healthy Community Services, part of Waterwise, works with Waterwise. Yes. Well, we are about out of time. I'm gonna camera back to myself because that's how it works around here. But I just want to thank everyone for being here. I want to make just a couple of quick announcements before we head out. First, I want to thank our 3 panelists who offered really interesting takes. And I do think, Angela's point there, an interesting overlap with some of the issues that Aron was bringing up. So good, right? Toby. So last, okay, great. I do want to make a couple of quick announcements. I mentioned our partnership with IC Change, and I just do want to encourage anyone who's interested to go to either ichange.org or go to cbno.org. We're trying to get people to actually use this and capture images, capture sightings, document the changes that are happening in your neighborhood. We're going to be doing more over the coming weeks and months. As I said, we're going to try to, several people have mentioned trying to leverage the city to do different things, to get more involved, to be more of a leader. This is one of the ways that we can do that. That is one initiative that we're really going to keep pushing over the months ahead. Another that we're about to get started is we're about to initiate a series of facilitated conversations with different community groups, neighborhood associations, unions around town, other groups, individuals, workforce development, agencies, try to figure out what we mean as residents, as communities, when we talk about rebuilding equitably here in New Orleans. What does it mean for these millions, potentially billions of dollars to come in and be distributed? We want to see that distributed in an equitable fashion. It's actually going to build jobs going forward. And I was interested to hear Tom mention the workforce development components that they're a part of. We need to link these things together and make sure that the money is actually getting to where it needs to go and doing the good. And when Aaron's, profound points about we need to make hard choices, we need to actually think hard about difficult questions. Times now. So we're going to be doing that. Out some of that information coming from CBNO. We are hopeful that at some point, hopefully not too long, too far into 2023, we'll have an actionable set of metrics and an action plan that hopefully the city can adopt in its ISHA applications going forward for a lot of these projects in the years ahead. So look out for that. But I just want to thank all y'all for being here, making your way to Son of the Saint in this beautiful room, beautiful space. And also look out for hopefully some interesting, fun bits of content and posts on IC Change from the Son of the Saint mentees and mentors. So we're going to be working on it as well. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Shit.